So in the previous session, I was explaining how we can actually recover a keyframe back to main and then over to the navigator. That's important if you're in a situation where you want to rethink the keyframe. But as I was also explaining, is you want to be careful that you don't get in too far in the keyframes. By the time you figure out that, oops, there's, I'm off to a whole different problem scenario. In other words, you don't want to get too many keyframes created before you're sure you want to keep those keyframes. In which case, then you do a backup just in case you need to recover and revert. So, okay, so let's do this. Let's do some more keyframes. So I have basically recovered back to a particular starting point in my keyframe animation. Now I'm thinking to myself, what I want to do here in this large Mandelbulb scene, which I deliberately created to be large and big and lots of depth and lots of interesting patterns and objects and coloring and lighting in the scene. I created it this way because I knew that I wanted to navigate through it. I wanted to fly through this scene, and I don't want to just settle for a straight shot, although I certainly could. Now let's set things up a little bit here. Let's talk about your keyframes. Typically what I do is I will set this subframe to render between to 100. Now up here, we were fooling around a couple sessions ago and I had set that to 22 just to show you that you can override the number of subframes pertaining to each keyframe. I'm going to put that back at 100. Now try to envision what I'm going to tell you next, that these are the number of subframes from this keyframe to the next one. If I was to do this animation right now, the animation would be keyframe 1 to keyframe 1. And this would basically give me 100 subframes. And the application, the Mandelbulb3D application, would determine where the stopping point is, which would be on frame 100. Typically, you're not going to have it as simple as one frame. You could, but sort of like, what's the point? What's going to happen is that if my subframes are all going to be the same image, because as I was explaining earlier, the animation is moving between one keyframe to the other, and a keyframe is a position in space in your your Mandelbulb 3D environment, your scene, and a position in space and time. So if you have one keyframe that you're trying to animate, there's no time. You're not moving anywhere. So this would not be anything other than 100 of these images. So naturally, the rule of thumb is that you need to have 2 or more keyframes. All right, I think that's pretty straightforward. So what we're going to do now is we're going to navigate, but we need to pay attention to these number of subframes. Too many subframes, say for a 30, say a 30 frames per second. All right, let's, I'll tell you what, let's back up a little bit here. Let's put another keyframe in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate forward. I'm not going to use the Stream Deck because I can really get a lot of steps in there. What I want to do is I want to step forward, but I want to do it in a controlled manner. So my sliding and walking steps is 20. I'm going to set that to 200 so I have a bigger step. I'm in a big vista environment here, so I don't need to have tiny little steps. I can move around a bit. So I set that to 200. Now I'm going to walk one step. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I did 10 forward steps at 200 step amount per. And so what's that going to be? That's going to be 2,000 steps. I have no idea what those steps mean. I don't know if it's centimeters or miles. I don't have any idea, and I don't think anybody does. It's kind of a relative number. It's relative. It's a reference point, but it doesn't really mean anything other than 200 is greater than 100. That's greater than 20. Okay, you get the picture. So what I did is I moved forward 10 times 200 steps, and now I'm going to make another keyframe. I got to make sure that I'm on a blank keyframe up here. Otherwise, if I wasn't, I would overwrite this one. And there is no warning. If you punch this any key or the F key, it will overwrite that keyframe and it will not tell you, are you sure you want to do this? So think of that as a little idiosyncrasy of the application. It doesn't warn you when you're about to trash a keyframe. So you got to make sure you're off of that. And there is no way to lock that or protect it. All right, so now I'm going to put this keyframe up into the animation window. So what I have now is I have 2 keyframes, and there are 100 subframes between those 2 keyframes. All right, and I have walked forward by 2,000 steps. 10 walk forward buttons times 200 steps. So what I like to do is this. Here's how I keep track of this stuff. I'll take a notepad, and what I'll do is I'll say keyframe number 1, tab, and I'll say I walked forward. All right, forward. Do 2 if you want. Times 10, and then I'll do something like the steps were 200. Now that's just a little code for me. That tells me that keyframe number 1, I walked forward 10 steps. If you want to be a little bit more, times 200 step count. I mean, if you want to be that detailed about it. There's my step count, 200, and I walked forward 10 steps. That's 10 presses of the forward of the W button. All right. So that's keyframe number 1. Keyframe number 2, I haven't really defined what that is. This is actually a movement that occurred, let's say, between keyframe number 1 and keyframe number 2. That's actually what that really is. And so what this is going to give me, it's going to give me 100 subframes. All right, let's get that notepad back. Where'd you go? All right. So this is going to give me 100 subframes. Now I could kind of rewrite this, and I could say I could say between 0 and 100 subframes, I have walked forward 10 steps of 200 step count. All right, let's make that keyframe number 1, or it might be something like this. Keyframe number 1. Yeah, I mean, you do this any way you want. You're going to find that if you keep track of this stuff like this in this little notepad or handwrite it, whatever you want to do, you're going to find that you have a pretty good idea where you are as you navigate through this scene, as you create keyframes. All right, so we'll just do it that way. And then of course I'm gonna continue when I create my second keyframe, which is going to be frames 101 through, and we'll pick this up in the next session. I'll see you there.